Hey everyone, it's Casey's on the case.
And Steph.
And we are here with a special episode to talk about the new collective bargaining agreement that was just entered into actually on July 11th, but we're just getting news of it today on August 22nd. So we were not planning to be here, but this news broke like super early this morning. So we don't have a normal frolic through Walnut Creek lore planned for you. We did not come up with anything new there, but we do have one quick non-soccer before we go full soccer, and that's if you have not heard the news, and probably you'll be listening to this the day after, and you're all going to know who it was by this point. But we are taping in the afternoon on Thursday, August 22nd. There is a rumor that there is a surprise guest at the Democratic National Convention tonight. There's a gap in the schedule, and it's supposed to be someone bigger than Oprah. So, Stephanie, who do you think it is?
I mean, ladies, let's get in formation. You think it's Beyonce? Is that a boring answer?
I think it is most likely to be Beyonce as well. If it's not Beyonce, I will in fact be surprised. They're tracking Taylor Swift's plane. And apparently she's back in the US already from England. And could it be both Taylor and Beyonce? I think that would be pretty huge. That would be pretty big.
I have legit chills.
So I'm excited to see who this is instead of Bill Clinton rambling for 25 minutes. But God, it just, everybody needs to talk shorter time, I say, as I get on this podcast where I'm going to talk too long. So anyway, if that's my DNC rant. And I've also heard people say it's just going to be Pink, and Pink was already a confirmed guest. And I think we can all agree that Pink is not bigger than Oprah. So
it's pretty awesome. I mean,
listen, is she going to do the acrobatics and the aerials? Is she going to do that at the DNC? Because that's fun.
Yeah.
You know, Republicans have Hulk Hogan, but Pink with the acrobatics is going to happen to the DNC. So, you know, watch out, Republicans. Let us know if we were right or wrong about that. But I feel very good about Beyonce. I think outside chance of Taylor joining her, but I feel good about Beyonce, I think.
Yeah, me too.
Well, we'll see. All right, let's talk about collective bargaining agreements. I'm like, speaking of democratic policy, no, just kidding.
Well, I mean, as hard as it can be to decode deep policy, can you decode what a collective bargaining agreement means?
Yeah, so that's just a fancy term for, like, it's a big employment contract, right? And it's just the rule by which every player's contract will be governed and how the league has to treat them. The players are part of an association that is a union. So that is what a collective bargaining agreement is. What is interesting about collective bargaining agreements and the NWSL is, while collective bargaining agreements are kind of part and parcel of a lot of leagues with players associations, the NWSL actually did not have one until 2022. So this is a fairly new thing for the NWSL in general. And it's a good thing to have. It protects players and it gives people a sense of security with what to expect as they move forward. So the current CBA was meant to run through 2026, but they started renegotiating it back in 2023 after the Women's World Cup. Obviously, a lot of growth in the game every time you have a World Cup, a lot of increased focus on other leagues, and a lot of increased criticism over, you know, certain things in the NWSL that to us as Americans are pretty normal and seem like just regular sports thing, but are actually really not normal and are not particularly player friendly or worker friendly. Because I think that you ultimately have to keep in mind that these are human beings who are employees. They are not chattel, they are not property, and that is really a big sense of what these changes are as we go through the new collective bargaining agreement. So,
what brought it on? Do we know?
So we know that they wanted to approach having these conversations earlier, just again off of the World Cup, and I think there has just been a lot of criticism with, you know, the draft. There's been a lot of criticism with the expansion draft. There's a lot of criticism when players get traded without their consent. You know, and these have been things that have been increasingly addressed already through the 2022 CBA, for example, created free agency. Because before within this league, you didn't even have free agency, really. Like, women's national team players were allocated essentially, and you could only have a certain number of designated U.S. women's national team players on your team in order to create parity. So these players had really no say in where they played, and they could get sent to completely just teams where, you know, Whisper Network wise, they knew it wasn't a safe situation. or, you know, maybe it was just somewhere that was not hospitable to them for whatever reason, right? There were also not a lot of great protections about, you know, moving costs and what that would mean for families. It's just kind of a continuation of that movement of, okay, we did a little bit, now what can we do that's better? And you have increasing competition as these other leagues develop and become economically viable places for women to play. You know, in your own backyard, like increased aggressive competition from Liga MX Femenil in Mexico, where those player salaries are great. It's a free market. Players can go where they want to go. Increased competition within Europe as well. And we'll talk more about that because I think that the European spots are not as appealing in a lot of ways for big time players. But, you know, originally, like not originally, but even talking like as recently as like 2019 or so, there weren't that many viable other leagues to go to. So the NWSL didn't have to be meaningfully competitive on the player rights end. And now they do, because you also have USL Super League that has come into play here, and, you know, is not going to compete directly with NWSL, at least right now. And they've said that they don't aspire to do that. But they are, you know, more player friendly, and they have said that that is a focus for them, is player rights. So there's just a lot of pressure. I think waiting until 2026 would have been too long. So why not do it now so that you don't risk falling behind? Because you are at risk, I think, meaningfully as you continue to move forward, falling behind if you hadn't made these changes now.
What's with the date difference? So it went into effect in July, but we're just hearing about it now?
Yeah, so the meeting, apparently, the like last meeting that got this deal done was, I believe it was like from July 9th through 11th, which is actually during the player break, mid-season break under the old CBA.
Okay.
Some of the players that are actually on the NWSL PA and like have roles in that were there doing the negotiations, and apparently the deal got done and signed July 11th. We are just hearing about it today, August 22nd, and it's worth noting we don't actually have the full collective bargaining agreement of the nitty-gritty, or I could set you paragraphs and I could do the whole lawyer thing and, you know, go into like what parts I think are vague. What we have is the key points from the NWSL PA website, and from what was clearly reading the press briefing, like there are members of the press who have had these bullet points for weeks now, who probably got them, you know, in advance of the Olympics. Like that Vanity Fair case did not get put together this morning at 3 a.m. when it got announced. It clearly was weeks worth of work and of interviewing people. So, you know, there's been a lot of coordination here clearly about who was going to know what information, how it was going to be rolled out and when. And of course, NWSL is back in action this weekend. So that's all interesting. But the thing that I want to see in the fine print that we'll talk about is if it's effective July 11th, there's quite a few implications, particularly when we talk about this current trade window that I'm not sure how this works. So I have guesses, but that's an interesting little facet of information that I think is getting glossed over a little today.
Interesting.
So let's get into those key points
Okay.
of briefing, and we'll go through. These are the key points from the NWSL PA website, and then we'll get into questions that a lot of you asked in the comment section on my TikTok videos. So the first key point of the new NWSL PA, bargain to collective bargaining agreement is the elimination of the draft. And the NWSL PA states the entry draft is eliminated immediately. The expansion draft is abolished immediately. The draft is an antiquated model that treats people as property to be bought and sold. The new terms will empower players to decide which team environment is the best fit for their needs and their development. And this is, of course, the point that is getting all of the headlines.
So we've gotten a lot of questions, or I should say you have gotten a lot of questions on this topic. So the first one, will this destroy league parity?
So no, I don't think it will at all be an issue, because ultimately what this league still has that the other leagues in Europe don't have is a salary cap. And can a salary cap be manipulated? Sure. Are there, are some teams going to be better working around it than others? Absolutely. You see that with any kind of salary cap or fair play rules. But ultimately that cap is still going to put some limitation on hoarding, top talent and just basically buying a win in the league. And I think that the thing that's getting missed here, people are kind of panicking about the draft situation. I think because as Americans, that is like, all of our leagues have drafts. That is just a normal thing.
Yeah.
Like, it's a draft. It's fun. It's exciting. You want to see what happens. But what I will say here is I think the bigger thing that has already essentially created the parity problem, so to speak, was getting free agency to begin with. Because if it's just the draft, you're really only talking about the first 3 years of a player's career in the league. And then beyond that, they were going to be a free agent. They can go where they want anyway. So I don't think it's going to be as impactful as one would think. And the other thing that I think actually does a bigger disservice to parity, but is way more important and nobody's going to be up in arms over, or I don't think they should be anyway, is the trade consent issue. Because if you can't trade players without their consent, then you might have players that just refuse to go to teams, or you might have teams where they can't really get players. So those two changes, and again, those changes were really set in, at least the free agency change was really part of the 2022 CBA. So that was a much bigger issue when you talk about parity. And when we look at the impact that's had on the league in parity, look at the two top teams in the NWSL right now, which are Kansas City Current and Orlando Pride. Neither one of those two teams got their advantage from the draft. I think you can argue Washington Spirit did get an advantage in the draft because they drafted very, very well. But their other two top teams, they didn't draft well. They scouted well, and they've been scouting well in regions where this league has not historically scouted well. Kansas City in particular scouted really well in Africa and continues to do so, or African players rather. Maybe they're playing other places, but they're scouting well and approaching players who are not getting approached by other teams. That's where they've had a real advantage, and that has nothing to do with drafts at all. So you're going to see teams start to gain advantages and look at other ways to do it. And I think that's really where this is going. I just don't think this is going to do as much for parity as people think, especially look at how many rookies are meaningfully impacting their teams this year. It is pretty much only Washington Spirit who has a notable advantage from a rookie. And that's because Croy Bethune is just, okay. And Utah, obviously, like Ali Sednor is playing very well, and she's a standout. But like Utah's having a rough time. So I don't think they've it hasn't helped them. It would just be really awkwardly worse if they didn't have Ali Sednor. So, but it's already bad. So I don't know if it can be that much worse.
It's only up from here.
Yeah. Maybe, or not. Well, that's the thing is I think that they're, we'll talk about this in a minute. I think they are one of the teams at risk of not being able to get people to come play there. I do. So, and I guess we can just talk about that question now.
Yes. How will expansion teams get their players then?
So, yeah, so expansion teams, I think you're going to see, and this is mainly how Utah and Bay FC got their players this year, is if you look, they didn't really get their players from the expansion draft. They, most teams dealt with them before to get expansion draft protection. So you don't see those teams being made up mainly of expansion draft players, and you don't even see them being made up mainly of full college draft players, again, with the exception of Ali Sednor and then Savvy King on Bay FC, are two players that are starting and playing quite a bit. But Sednor is probably the best player on Utah. So it's, I think they'll just have to go back. It's one player though, right? You're going to just have to go back to recruiting. I think that these expansion teams in the future, we will see what the CBA says, because it should, and maybe it's not the CBA, it's the league rules probably on expansion. But if the expansion draft is gone, I would imagine expansion teams are going to get extra money on the salary cap like they have now, just to help them get more players, because they need to be able to do something.
Okay. And how will new players end up at teams then?
Yeah, so you can just join a team.
So my career's not over?
Yeah, you can still go if you want. You can. There's USL teams. USL teams do have open tryouts still. Because I always joke with Dan, I'm like, I'm just gonna go out for Oakland Soul this week. I'm just gonna do it. Why not? I can still play there. And then I look at it's like players who very much are flirting with NWSL. I have no business going to an Oakland Soul training of any kind, but it's just a fun dream in my head. Yeah. So you don't have to get drafted, right? I think you're going to see a lot more scouting, aggressive scouting within college, and probably conversations happening earlier to players because they don't have to go through that draft. So scouts can start talking to players. Scouts can invite them in for a training. And somebody on TikTok said, that's called being a trialist, and that's a trial. That is one way that can happen, and that's basically a fancy word for tryout, like you might have had as a kid, but it's more you come and you train for a week or so, or maybe even a little longer, and figure out if it's a fit. but you see it happen even less formally. Like sometimes it is just, I'm training with this team right now. I'm not going to sign. I'm kind of in between things. This is where I'm at. Or, you see it with very young players go just to get a flavor for the level. So I think you'll see, and I just don't think it necessarily has to be as formal as being a trialist, but I think you're going to see more college players going and, having a little soccer camp of their own over there for a minute just to explore some options and see. And, if there's a team that makes sense for them, maybe they leave college early. And if there's not, they wait, but they have a lot more say over that. So I think that'll be interesting. And then the other thing I'll flag here is just keep in mind that most players entering through a U18 mechanism in NWSL are not coming from academies. There's no true academies in NWSL. There are programs that call themselves academies, but they are just club soccer with the name of the NWSL team. They are not true development academies with the goal of the player actually being with the full team. It's just good for branding. So, you want to just make sure that that's a little bit different. But I think really the same thing you're seeing happen with the under 18 mechanism where, players are training somewhat with a club team or with an NWSL team rather, and then joining and signing a deal. I think it's just going to be the same with college players on their breaks.
Okay. What else do you think are the implications for college players?
So I don't think that there's as much here as you might think in terms of the draft going away and being a big implication for college. I think that college soccer is in an interesting place with conference realignment, with NIL, but also with, again, economic pathways and developing earlier in this sport worldwide. I have been kind of concerned about where college soccer is going for a couple of years now, just because this is a sport where some of your best development years are from 18 to 22. And if you're only playing with other 18 to 22-year-olds, I don't think that's good for you. I do think you should be getting bodied by somebody who's like 27 or like a really tough, gritty 35-year-old center back coming in. And like, even though they're like, you think you're hot shit and you're a little fast and they give it to you. Like, I think you got to go learn those lessons. And you're better off learning them from 18 to 22. I think, frankly, you will end up behind a lot of the time, not going and pushing yourself there. So from a talent pool perspective, it's always been good to have players going a little bit earlier, in my eyes, particularly in that 18 to 22 window it's really what concerns me long-term with the development. That being said, you always want to talk about talent capture and how do we keep more players playing the game longer so that we still have a deeper talent pool for people who develop in different ways and at different speeds. And if college soccer fully goes away, you lose a large portion of your talent capture in the US. So it needs to stay. But that's all a little bit sideways. I think college teams are going to continue to market themselves the way they've been marketing themselves to players, which is here's the relationships we have, or at least the top players. Here's the relationships we have with these clubs. Here's with these scouts. Here's how we can help you get to the NWSL. Here's the number of players that we've gotten there. And now it'll be even stronger. It'll be much like what you see in club soccer about, we know this coach. Like we are buddies with the coach at this college. Our club has gotten this many players onto that team and into that program. You'll start to see similar things, I think, with colleges and NWSL and that relationship developing because it's good for college recruitment and it's good for the NWSL to have teams that they're friendly with at the college level. So it's going to change. It'll look a little bit different, but I don't think, again, it'll look markedly different.
Okay. And what about teams that are in less than optimal markets?
Yeah, so are they screwed? And that's are all these? Is everybody just gonna say I'm sorry to Louisville? I'm not going there. And I will tell you, Louisville's a more fun city than you might think. I've been there. It's great Cuban food, which you would not have thought that, but probably the best Cuban food I've ever had actually in Louisville. And the horse stuff's really fun too. It's cool. I saw the babies. It was really cool. So I recommend that. But look, these teams I think just because you're a smaller market, and we're talking also right now about, there's going to be a new NWSL team announced by the end of this year for the 2026 season. And the 3 finalists appear to be reportedly Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Denver. Those are not all cities that are on the same level. What I think it has been horrific that Denver has not had an NWSL team, given Denver's importance to women's soccer on the youth level. I don't understand it, but Cleveland's fighting for it. Cleveland's really fighting for it, and I know a lot of people over there, and they seem really amped, and I don't know how to be like I don't want to go to a game in Cleveland. I'm gonna be honest with you, but like I don't want to tell them no, and I wouldn't want to like anyway. I don't need to sit here and shit on Ohio forever, but when we talk about less desirable places to live or to be and free agency, I think that is something you have to acknowledge, is that there's a difference between living in Cleveland and a difference between living in Portland. Like, those are two different places for different players, but you need to find ways to make your team competitive and desirable and a good place for players to be. I think it's actually less about the city and the market you're in, and I think it's going to be more about the environment.
Yeah.
If you're a club that has a coach and staff and you're not training players right, like, people talk. It's not a secret when that's happening. So those teams, you're going to be in trouble. You're going to have to clean up your own house. I also think that teams in states where women's rights are not as protected, women don't have the same access to healthcare, there aren't the same LGBTQ plus rights, like I think you're going to be in trouble. And rightfully so. So that's just, something that these teams are going to have to deal with, and that I think expansion needs to deal with, because what woman of childbearing age wants to go to a state where you have not the same access to abortion? I just don't think that that's realistic. So those teams are going to be in trouble in some ways, but you will always have players who want the opportunity to play and are willing to set the rest of it aside. But they just probably will not be the top players, because the top players don't have to come there. So your team may have a rough time.
Yeah. Should we talk about free agency?
Yes, because this is, I think, the biggest. This and the trade clause are the ones that actually impact this the most. I really don't think this is the draft. The free agency and the trade clause stuff is what is going to create these teams that are struggling a little extra. So NWSLPA states free agency for all. All NWSL players will become free agents when their current contracts expire. By establishing free agency for all players, the NWSL aligns itself with the rest of the world. Free agency results in fairness of contracts with teams and players mutually agreeing to enter into a contractual relationship on even terms. So this is actually not that different, because free agency was to some degree established for players who had been in the league a certain duration under the 2022 CBA. But now you have free agency everywhere. You have free agency, even when you enter the league, obviously by abolishment of the draft as well. So it's really going to impact those first 3 years of a player's contract mainly. And it was, again, probably necessary to remain competitive, because who wants to be somewhere where they can just be traded, where they, don't have a say where they sign. And then also the trading, which is, the other big change.
Yeah. You mentioned contracts. So guaranteed contracts are part of this as well.
Yes, this is an exciting one. So NWSLPA announces that every contract will be guaranteed. Guaranteed contracts generally prevent the league from terminating player contracts prior to the end of their term, except in limited circumstances. This respects the mutuality of risk of contracts. It also protects players in the event circumstances beyond their control, such as a latent health condition. I am not reading out loud well, but that was okay.
No, you did fine.
Yeah. So this is pretty wild. This is not as common. Very few leagues have this. And we did get some questions on TikTok about specifically what the implications here may be.
So the question was, will this lead to shorter contracts because they have to be guaranteed now?
So yes and no. I think it certainly could. I don't know that this will change things, because there were always going to be risks with shorter contracts versus longer contracts for different players. And in fact, we've seen recently a lot of top talent opting for shorter contracts, because you're seeing essentially exponential growth within the women's soccer market and within these salaries going up. So if you lock in as a player to a longer deal, that tended to be bad for you anyway, because you could go from signing, being the highest paid player in the league 3 years ago, and now somebody who's like maybe in the top 50% is making what you were making, and you were probably better off with a shorter deal.
Yeah.
So that's why, we saw Sophia Smith sign like a very short deal. And that's betting on herself. And you could sit there and think like, well, what if I get injured? Don't you want the guaranteed money? Well, you might get injured, but then like if you're still locked in on that deal, you come back and you get even more money and you're back on that other salary track. So there's always been risks both directions. I don't think this is going to meaningfully change. And personally, I just think the way that we're seeing exponential growth in this salary range if you are signing deals longer than 3 years long and you're under 27, I don't advise that. I don't think that's good that's just not a good idea. But I'm not an agent, so I don't know. I just personally, I wouldn't do it.
That's your opinion, right? Not legal counsel that we
not legal advice. That's not legal advice. No, but
just gotta. Okay, so you've talked about already no trades without player consent. So what does that mean for the trades that we've heard about the last few weeks?
Yeah, so
they've had consent.
This is the one where we're going to go back to why that effective date was so critical, is because we're hearing about it today, August 22nd. We are in the middle of a transfer window that started August 1st, and this deal was entered into on July 11th. So that tells me and what we've seen in some of the deals we've seen the past 2 weeks is we've heard players basically insinuate they did not consent to the trades. Bethany Balcer is the one who comes to mind mainly, leaving Seattle to go to Louisville. And that means to me, one, I'm wondering if somebody really didn't do the lawyering and dot the I's and cross the T's, because I'm like, can Balcer go and unwind her trade now? But what I would guess is I have to imagine enough lawyers look at a CBA that somebody was like, the school day, maybe not this. So I have to imagine that what we'll find out when we get the full CBA is that provision requiring consent on trades is for the 2025 season, or it does not impact this window. So that's what I have to imagine is happening, but we don't know without seeing it. And it could be that they did have to consent to it, and Balcer just didn't want Seattle to feel like she didn't love them. I don't know. Yeah. But she also tweeted out right before you and I got on here, she's tweeting about life in Louisville, and it's very funny. She's like, yeah, there's 50 pigs outside blocking my driveway in a truck, and I was like, what's going on? And somebody told her they're gonna be slaughtered. She was like, no, what? Because Seattle did. Anyway, so some of the this is a weird segue too, but also if you did not see Mackenzie Arnold on Snapchat moving to Portland and just the struggles she was having with basic life stuff, that was fun. So go back and try to watch those if they're archived somewhere.
Okay, that's fine.
That was just entertaining. But anyway, so back to the trades. I think preventing trades without consent, again, one of the biggest criticisms of this league, and also I think the biggest probably meaningful change that will potentially impact parity and create a situation where you've got a couple teams that are not doing so hot over and over and over again.
What about workload management?
So this one is, the too long didn't read of the workload management clause is that they get to have charter flights, and there's requirements about charter flights, which, I know it sounds a little bougie, why can't they fly, coach or whatever? And I'm sorry, it takes a long time to fly out there with Jet Pop. It really does. And I am not an athlete. I am a sitter. I sit professionally, and I am gassed if I'm on a plane for that long. Yeah. So I just at my sitting again, doing the thing I was already doing on the plane. So I think it's good to make sure for player protection and just given again the length of travel. If you have not flown across the country recently, that is a much longer flight. I get pretty grumpy on any flight longer than 3 hours. Mm-hmm. And even the 3 hour ones can drain you. I can do the up and back in California in my sleep. That doesn't bother me at all. I don't even remember if I've been on a plane that day. But the other ones, no. So I'm glad to see the players will get that. They also will have, the assured midseason break, which they already had in 2020 under the 2022 agreement as well, and a 28-day break during the off season. And do keep in mind, so there's some questions here about how this interacts with Champions League, how this interacts with kind of the other cup games. And of course, international play for national teams. And I can't speak to those specifically because we have not seen the CBA itself, but those I think could cut into breaks potentially. So, yeah.
What about revenue sharing?
Okay, so this is another long one where it's you can read the full NWSL statement on it, but basically, the additional revenue that is acquired by the league as a result of selling media rights can then get trickled down to the teams and gets added on to the base salary cap. So effectively, it's a way of revenue sharing the media rights with the players. The thing that is interesting about this, and is kind of an interesting note here. The current media rights deal runs through 2028, and that was strategic because the league wanted to make sure they were negotiating the media rights deal again when the World Cup happens in 2027. So that was the business there, because they have a lot of more eyeballs. They have there's more opportunity there. The current CBA goes through 2030, and the way it's negotiated, if that media rights deal is substantially larger than the current one, then the teams and the players really through the salary cap are doing pretty well through the current deal. The back 2 years of the CBA, the ownership ends up doing much better. But my comment on that is, I don't think this CBA lasts through 2030. I don't. This last one didn't last through 2026. You think this one's lasting through 2030? No, I think this one gets renegotiated right after the World Cup again too, because that's the same deal, same leverage, same issues where you have growth everywhere. So this one's not going to last either. I don't think this is a big windfall for ownership. This thing is going to get renegotiated again if it is some kind of a market financial difference. So.
All right, should we jump to some comments from TikTok?
Yes. And these are ones we tried to pull comments that had a good number of likes or that I found interesting. So
how about I take a stab at reading them? And
yes, please do, because I don't think I'm reading out loud well.
Okay, no, you're doing great. Okay. First commenter, without a relegation. Without a relegation system, you need the college draft. I get getting rid of the expansion draft, but I'm not sure about getting rid of the college draft. I don't like a relegation system, but if you have no draft and no relegation, bad teams are going to stay bad for a while now.
Yeah. I mean, this could absolutely happen. I don't think this is wrong. I don't think the college draft was doing anything to prevent this. And again, case in point, sorry for the continued slander, is Utah. You have Ali Sednor. And they're still bad. So I don't think this is going to do a lot there. If you're a bad team in an undesirable environment and the players are not going to want to come there. That's just full stop what it is. Utah is having a difficult time getting players. They're not getting players through free agency. There's a reason for that. So, teams that are having a hard time getting good talent, they're going to have to find ways to change, find ways to make it desirable. And this is true of all U.S. sports leagues. There are teams that are perpetually bad for whatever reason, even with drafts. Like San Jose Earthquakes, bless y'all, you've been bad for a long time. I don't know what's going on over there, right? And they haven't been relegated yet. So you don't have relegation. This is just how U.S. sports work. Cleveland Browns, they were bad forever. Ever. It didn't look like it was ever going to get better. I'm a Raiders fan. It's hard. I haven't seen a Super Bowl in, over 20 years now. So this is just how this goes. There will be some bad teams, and we're okay with that. That's just how it is.
Okay. I like it. Okay, next question. I'm curious if you think players will be more likely to make the jump to pros or stick out all of college now that there's no more draft.
So potentially they might go a little earlier, because now I think you can have those conversations with teams and you might know a staff and have a good sense of where you're going. Because before it was I don't even think there was as much gamesmanship with NWSL soccer drafts as there have been with and what you've heard of in the NFL, for example, right? Of, players staying an extra year to avoid that top draft pick, or of course, just Eli Manning, and was not going to the Chargers. Absolutely not. So, I think there's always been less of that in the NWSL because they trade the picks and there's just a lot more fluidity about who's getting picked up where. But now you do have certainty about where you're going. You might, like the environment at a different time. So I just think it gives players more flexibility. And yeah, potentially you could see them go earlier at this point.
Thoughts on NWSL potentially creating an academy system like the WSL, or does complete player freedom make sense to set itself apart from other leagues?
So I think we will likely see some type of academy system develop similar to what we've seen in MLS. But you are talking ultimately about a full reworking of U.S. soccer and of youth soccer just in general here. And it's not going to happen that fast. So, you know, again, you maybe see some of the stuff we've seen on the men's side with a couple of the teams developing academies, and maybe they partner up with academies in Europe and do some exchanges to give players exposure that way and develop those relationships. But I don't think you're going to see a full-blown switch to an academy system, and you probably will never see it as long as college soccer is a factor here.
And last question, do you think this is why an influx of European players transferred into the NWSL over this last window?
No, I think that the NWSL has a lot more opportunity here to play with a top team than you do in Europe. If you think about Europe, and depending on what country you want to be in, like, and if you care about being somewhere where you speak the language or whatever it is that you want, you do not have the same number of teams that provide opportunities as you do here. So like, if you want to play a top team in Spain, it's Barcelona. Real Madrid ain't there yet. It's just Barcelona. That's the only team you got. And then what, you want to play in France? Okay, guess what? It's Lyon or it's PSG. And like, there's a pretty steep drop off there between those two as well. And then maybe Paris FC. And then what? The German league, 2 teams. So, and then WSL, 4 teams really of like top teams. And I think 4 is very arguable. I don't know that Manchester United should be counted there. So what are you going to do? Like, if those players are full in your spots, like, you got to go somewhere else at some point. And depending on what style of play you are and how you're going to fit, like, if you're a defender, why would you ever go to the Spanish league to go play for Barcelona? Like, unless you like just want to play for Barcelona, that's not going to be beneficial to you in the Spanish league. You're not going to develop it all. So you can't really go there. I think for defenders in particular, going to the NWSL makes a ton of sense because you will actually develop and have to defend. You cannot play for a top team in any of these European leagues and have to meaningfully defend day in, day out. You will have to in the bigger matches when you get to play another big team, but that's not your bread and butter of matches. So if you're trying to develop, you're trying to get onto a national team, if you know, or start on a national team, maybe you're on the roster, but you want to show off more and start, going to the NWSL makes a lot of sense. Like Jess Carter, Esme Morgan, we just saw come over from WSL, who are both fighting for time in the Lionesses. That makes perfect sense to me that you would do that. So I think this has way less to do with they had like some inside knowledge that the CBA was going to get signed, and much more to do with, as a player, what opportunities can I get and what can I do to grow my skill set? And the NWSL just has more options for that because there's parity.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll hear more once you see the full CBA.
Yes, we will. So if you have other comments, let us know, you know, in the comment section on YouTube or on Spotify or on TikTok. And if you don't already follow us on one of those, please do. And I should really share this sad news later, but we are no longer the #2 soccer podcast in Kenya. I know, I guess somebody got home from vacation. So we will remember that time fondly. So thank you for listening if you're still here, and join us next time for more frolics into Walnut Creek lore and more women's soccer talk.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.